Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the artistic, creative side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host, and this week's episode is something a little different to usual. If you've been following on Twitter or in the show's Discord, you may have heard I picked up COVID whilst on a holiday in the UK, so I'm stuck here for a while, waiting it out and feeling like crap. But I did have an episode planned for this week about the relaunch of the PS Plus service, with lots of games that have been covered on this show in the past, and lots of hidden gems, lots of indie picks, some cult classics, and I had planned to run through a few of those for people that have signed up for PlayStation Plus for the first time, or people that have a new PS5 and they're wondering what to play. And so instead of doing a whole show, because I don't really feel up to talking for a long time, I have put together this little package of reviews clipped from old episodes, including games like Rez Infinite, Bound, The Last Guardian, and a few others. So if you're wondering what to play on PlayStation Plus, I hope that you enjoy this selection of games that you can play on that service. I will say that these episodes were recorded across the course of over 2 years. I think the earliest one here is from episode 15 or even 12, something like that. So it's a different mic, it's a different, you might notice some different sound levels because these reviews are from throughout the history of the podcast. Anyway, I'm going to go back to bed. I hope that you enjoy this episode. Take care of yourselves and each other. I'll be back soon with a new episode. Bye-bye for now. But before we talk about the games, I will also very briefly mention that the show has a Patreon and is listener supported. So if you enjoy it, if you enjoy the show today as a first-time listener, or if you're a long-time listener who would like to lend some support, you can go to patreon.com/gaminginthewild and sign up for just $1 a month or €1 a month or more if you'd like. And it helps me to keep the show running, to upgrade my equipment, get music to put into the show, get new games to write about. And there's also a really nice little Discord community where you can come and chat to me and other listeners and friends about what we're all playing, tell us what you're excited about, hear what we're excited about. That's patreon.com/gaminginthewild if you're interested in that. And with that out of the way, let's move on and talk about the featured game of the episode, Concrete Genie. So Concrete Genie is by a studio called Pixel Opus. It came out in 2019. It's directed by Dominic Robillard, with music by Samuel Marshall. And this studio also made Entwined. It's a game that I have downloaded from PlayStation Plus that has been coming up in my algorithm constantly. I haven't played Entwined, but I think I will after playing Concrete Genie because I'm very impressed by it. Pixel Opus has an interesting story, actually. It's a studio founded from a Sony initiative that they launched to find small studios after the surprise success of Journey. So they were scouting around for small studios, and they partnered with the Carnegie Mellon University. I have no idea where that is. And they found that students could prototype games incredibly rapidly. And so they brought together some of the most promising students under the guidance of a couple of industry veterans, including Dominic, who directed this game, to found Pixel Opus. So that's a really interesting way for a studio to exist. It's a Sony-funded studio. And it maybe goes some way to explaining why this game feels so fresh. It really does feel full of good ideas and full of vibrancy. It doesn't lean on past games, and it has mechanics that feel like nothing I've quite seen before, actually. The game is about a teenager called Ash, that's who you play, who is living in Denska, a dark, abandoned industrial town where there is a power station, a shipyard, the traces of old industry. And it's an abandoned town, there's no one around, but there is a lot of darkness, a lot of hulking ruins, a lot of alleyways. And it's all very nicely made and very atmospheric. It reminds me a little of The Nightmare Before Christmas, if you've seen that Tim Burton classic. There's like a sort of tall stairways that kind of wind upwards and hulking silhouetted buildings against the skyline and teetering structures. Everything feels like it's crumbling, but it's all kind of dramatic and interesting and kind of romantic in its own way and kind of gothic in its own way. It's a really cool environment for the game to happen in. And Ash is living seemingly it's never fully explained, but Ash seems to be homeless or kind of living hand to mouth in this abandoned town. It's just him, and there's also a bunch of other kids there, like kind of a little gang of bullies basically, who you'll encounter on your journey through the game. And Ash spends most of the time with their nose in a sketchbook, making paintings, making drawings, doodling on the walls, and kind of lost in this imaginary world of interesting creatures. But one day, Ash's sketchbook is snatched out of his hands by the bullies, and they tear all the pages out and throw them away. And Ash flees and gets in a cable car and goes up to the old creepy lighthouse at the top of the town. And there he finds a magic paintbrush. One of his drawings comes to life, and he realizes that the paintbrush that he has can draw things in a way that he never dreamed. It can cast beautiful, flickering, coloured imagery onto walls. It can bring to life the creatures that he's been imagining in his sketchbook for all of his life. And so, armed with this brush, Ash descends back down into the town to find the missing pages of his sketchbook and to clean up the town. Turns out that the brush can also sweep away some of the darkness, some of the pollution and the purple vines that clog up the town. And so he wants to light up the town with his paintbrush. And that leads me to the core mechanic of Concrete Genie, which is drawing on the walls. And this is super cool because you run around, it's a third-person sort of action-adventure-y setup. You can always see Ash as you guide him around the town. But if you look at a wall, you can dip into a menu of imagery, say vines or mountains or rain or like hanging strings of bulbs. And you can focus on the wall, and by tilting the controller and pulling the trigger, you can paint across the walls in a really instinctive, intuitive way. It's not like you're kind of pointing your controller at the screen and kind of sweeping left to right. You just hold it in a comfortable position, you tilt the controller left and right, and the motion controls inside of the DualShock controller paint across the screen. Very tactile, it's a small thing. It feels like it would have been very easy for it not to work, but it really does. If you've played the demo of Dreams, Dreams uses a similar mechanic to allow you to maneuver around inside of that game and to make games inside of that game. Concrete Genie does the same thing, so it does make you feel like you have a slightly more tactile relationship with what's happening inside the screen than if you were just using the controller. For people that don't want to do that, you can also use the right-hand stick, but honestly, it works really well. I recommend sticking with the original control scheme. And it's kind of immensely satisfying to be going around this dark, dilapidated town. And anytime you see a wall, a blank wall, you can light it up. The things that you can draw, they are in such bright colours and they move. So if you paint like a sea of grass across the side of a warehouse, the grass will have like little flecks of blue and pink neon colours in them. It's a natural palette, but it's also very heightened, so it's almost fluorescent, almost day glow. And so it ends up looking like neon lights. And so as you're painting these natural forms of aurora borealis and trees across this sea of empty buildings, you slowly start to light up the town bit by bit by bit. And every wall you paint on, if it's strung with fairy lights, it will light up the fairy lights. And you have to find all of the little patches of fairy lights around the first neighbourhood, paint the walls, light the bulbs, and then a new gate will open and you can move forward. And that's how you enter the game. It's really nice, it's really gentle, it feels really good to do it. It feels like you're expressing yourself into this world. And even though all of the imagery that you draw is kind of expertly drawn, it's very, very well done. It does feel like it's coming from your own hand. It does feel like you're casting your ideas onto the walls. And it really does take you into the game, take you into Ash's imagination and into this dark world. And there are some puzzles for you to solve as you're moving around this world too. For example, if you come to a gate that's frozen shut and there's a kind of a machine to make it open, or if you come to a fast-moving river and you need to cross it, you need a little bit of help to make these things open up for you. And the way that you do this is that after you've lit all the fairy lights, and by the way, fairy lights is a Britishism. I'm not sure what you call them in the US. I feel like it's one of those phrases that the US listeners will find really cute and British, but we call them fairy lights. The lights that you put around a Christmas tree anyway. Maybe string lights or something like that. But after you've lit all the lights, you are able to bring to life genies. Those are the creatures from Ash's imagination. And you collect pages of his sketchbook, and then you can bring the genies from the pages to life. And this means that you draw them on a wall. You can add features to them, like wings or ears or horns, arms and legs. And then you bring them to life, and they run around, and you can call them. So if you find an electrical switch, you can call the genies that you've brought to life, and they'll run through the walls to where you are. They're kind of 2D, they're frozen inside the walls, but they can move around the buildings, around corners, and find you. And they can zap that electricity switch back to life. Or if it's a wind one, a blue one, it can blow things. So it could blow an old crate into the water that you can then jump onto. And so you end up with a kind of a menagerie of cartoony genie illustrations that are kind of running around after you through the walls. And later on, as you're running around the town, just doing your thing, climbing up on the rooftops, sliding down wires, moving through the town, you'll see your genies. They're just hanging out. You might come down and find that one of them has found a fire that you've painted onto a wall and he's sitting by it like a campfire. Or if it's raining, because you've painted animated rain onto the side of a building, you might find one of your genies hiding under some leaves. You can interact with them in really fun ways too. Sometimes you'll find like a ball on the ground, you can interact with it and throw it into the hoop. Your genie will then high-five you from inside the wall. They're like little friends for Ash. Like his imaginary friends are coming to life. It's very cute. And it has a practical application too. Like your genies really, you can't get through the game without them. They are your friends, they're a puzzle mechanic. And so as you're painting the walls, you're bringing these genies to life, advancing through the game, through each neighbourhood. And you would also find those nasty bullies again who torn up the sketchbook at the start. You can't be caught by them, but what you can do is from a rooftop, you can stamp on the roof, draw them away from a spot where they're hanging out, like a street corner or a gate that you need to go through. You can draw them away and then jump back down and run through. So there's a little bit of a kind of a gentle stealth mechanic as well. But gentle is the key word for this game, really, because although it does contain elements of hiding, elements of darkness and some puzzles, I moved through it pretty effortlessly. I didn't have to look up any solutions, which is quite rare for me. and was never tempted to, actually. Like, all of the solutions feel within arm's reach if you just think about what's at your disposal. And the puzzles are really cool, actually. There are some times when you need to use your electrical genie to start a machine that will lift up like a crane, and then Ash can then scale the rope of the crane and things like that. He's very mobile, and so I guess it's a very kind of a gentle sort of style of parkour in a way. You can jump up onto pipes and pull yourself up onto the roof of a building. There's a whole kind of world on top of the rooftops too, in that kind of Mary Poppins way. Like, as you're looking for the pages of your sketchbook, you might see them blowing across rooftops, and you might be able to get on top of one building but not another. And so you have to kind of scan your eyes across the rooftops of the town and see if you can figure out a way to get as high as possible and then slide down onto a difficult to reach obscure rooftop to get all of the pages that you're going to need. The more pages you get, the more things you can draw onto the walls, the more features you can add to your genies. It's cosmetic, but it's a big part of the fun of the game. I had fun making genies that were kind of, they have horns and they have arms and legs and stuff, but I kind of just turned them all into giant butterflies by, giving them ridiculous feather that's supposed to be a tail, but just giving them 8 on each side. You can turn these genies into anything you want them to be. And they really do feel like pets or friends, and they kind of run around and interact with you. It's all very cute. And you might find Ash also has scribbled onto the walls. Before he had his magic brush, he was just doing little doodles here and there. And if you find your doodles, you can summon the genies over to them, and the genies will ask you to paint certain things on the walls. And it's like a little kind of collectibles puzzle sequence. You have to find all of your obscure little drawings and then follow some instructions from your genies on what to paint. And then you will have ticked that one off. So as you're moving through the world, there's plenty to look out for. You have the main puzzles that are in the way of progression. You have the bullies, which you have to avoid. You have the dark vines that you have to get rid of with the fairy lights. And you also have these little drawings to look out for. You have the pages to collect. There's quite a lot to keep you busy as you're moving around this world. There are 6 or maybe 7 chapters to the game. Each one takes about an hour at the most. Depends on how much you want to do. You could probably move through the whole game in 5 hours if you wanted to. I think I was somewhere between 6 and 7. I think I have 85% trophies or something like that. So you can be a completionist about the game, a completionist. And the painting mechanic is so fun, and the traversal is so pleasurable. Honestly, it's the kind of game that it's good to take slow, I think. Just really take your time, really just stop and paint whole city blocks. And then as you kind of move through the game, you'll move higher into the industrial remnants of factories and a power plant. And you can scan your eyes back across the town that you've come from and see all of the work that you've done lighting the place up. There are also some billboards lying around for things, attractions that used to be in the town, like an aquarium or, like fishing trips and things like this. And the billboards are all very old-fashioned and they're kind of animated, but they're all broken down and fallen and rusty. And if you found enough imagery that means you can match the patterns on the billboard, it'll come back to life and tell you some of the story of this town, some of the attractions of this town that used to be there or might have been. And there are also newspapers that you can find that will fill you in on some of the town's history, why it's abandoned, why it's so polluted. So there's like a little environmentalist strand to this game too. It's something that I'm always in favour of. I like it when a game has a positive message coming through it. And so this game, I guess, is about environmentalism, community. It's also about how people interact with each other. It's about imagination. And the bullies have a part to play too. It's about a little bit about bullying and self-expression. There are lots of nice messages resonating through the game that all add up along with the gameplay, the wonderful design, the environment, the characters, the writing, great animation. that has almost a kind of a paper cut look to it sometimes. And it all adds up to this really special sense of warmth. I really felt my heart was warm as I played through this game, and I had a constant sense of enjoyment. There's something about the palette, about the neon colours, something about the colour therapy, and just the thrill of being able to cast imagery onto walls on such a grand scale. You can make this town into a kind of a lighting installation, and it's wondrous in a way. If it fills you with a sense of wonder. I was smiling a lot as I played through this game. The game does have a second act to it as well. It does develop as you progress. The gameplay develops as you progress almost constantly. There are always new mechanics, new types of genies, new types of puzzles, new kind of heights that you have to climb to and depths you have to climb down to. And the kind of unrolling history of the town and the narrative, the story develops. New gameplay mechanics are introduced. The second half of the game is actually quite different to the first, but I won't spoil it here. I just think it's good to let you know that it's not going to be a game that settles into a rut. It really does feel like a kind of a magical adventure that just keeps developing as you move through it to the end. It's a rare game that I almost wish was a little longer. They do introduce some cool mechanics towards the end that you don't have to use very much. Maybe it would have been nice to actually have a longer stretch up to that finale. But after you've completed the game, there is a free painting mode, so you can visit the different sectors of the game, like the old fishing town, the factory, the waterworks, and all this kind of stuff. And you can just paint to your heart's content. There is also post-game content too. There are some things that you can't do until you have all of the imagery that you can paint. You kind of need to use the imagery as like key codes in a way to kind of activate genies to do certain things. So after the game's complete, there are still reasons to run around. There are still interesting ways to interact with your genies that you might not have noticed the first time. It's a game that I might well try and get a platinum trophy for. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll know that I've said this before, and I've often failed. I said I was going to get the platinum for No Man's Sky and for Horizon Zero Dawn, and I chickened out on the most difficult ones where you just have to do this boring stuff. But all of the ones in Concrete Genie seem quite attainable. And so I think just as an excuse to spend more time in this game world, I think I might well go back into the game and seek out all of those last little scribbles and all of the obscure pages that are blowing around the town and just tie up all of those loose ends. As I said at the start, this game is currently available for people that have PlayStation Plus as a free download, or at least as part of your membership fee. If you have a PlayStation and you have thought about getting PlayStation Plus, this is a really good month to do it actually, because the two games of the month for PlayStation 4 owners are Concrete Genie and Control Ultimate Edition. And I have done an episode on Control and another episode about some of the DLC of that game. I'm a huge fan of that game. It's really spectacular. And I mean, if you were going to buy Control and Concrete Genie, I think they'd run you like £20 each or something as downloads. And so that almost pays for like a year of PlayStation Plus. It's a good service. I mean, it's a random selection of games that you get. You just get one or two a month to download. But I have actually found it to be pretty good value. And as Concrete Genie illustrates, it's a game that I'd never heard of, and probably would not have found unless it had been on PlayStation Plus. So it does actually expose you to games that maybe you wouldn't choose, because I always download the games that are available and at least give them 5 or 10 minutes to see if I'm going to bin it or if it's something that I might be interested in. Concrete Genie turned out to be just an A+ game. Absolutely adored this one. So that's it. That's one way to play it. If you're interested in PlayStation Plus, now is a good time for that. The game does also have a PSVR mode, which I was fully intending to try before I recorded the episode. which I wanted to do tonight to get it out in time for Monday morning. But I realised that my Move controllers are completely out of battery, so I've got them on charging now. I will give Concrete Genie's VR mode a little spin and mention it if it's noteworthy. When I first got the game, I was quite excited to have something to play in PSVR when I saw that logo on the game. But it turns out that the VR is kind of an additional mode. It's not really a part of the main game. It's something that they've tacked on. So I'm assuming it's going to be a free painting mode where you use the Move controllers and you can paint around you. But I will definitely give that a try. So that's another reason to check it out if you're a PSVR owner looking for something to play. But all in all, Concrete Genie it's a game that has a sense of wonder and a warm heart. It's lovingly made. I really admire the craft of it. They've seen things coming that could have been problems. For example, not being able to see places that you could climb, not being able to see objects that you could interact with. All of the objects you can interact with have a little glittery sheen to them. If the illustrations might have been too hard to find on the walls, the small ones, they have like little clouds of white butterflies flying around them. And the same with the pages. If the pages might have been too hard to find, they actually do little routes around the rooftops and leave white trails behind them. Also, if you may have lost your genies and needed them, not knowing where they were, you can call them and there'll be little icons on the side of the screen telling you that they're coming. There are some points where you need to track things as well. And there's a mode where you can hold your paintbrush in the air and like a little trail of paint will blow in the direction that you're supposed to go. The map has really good modes so that you can filter out the noise and find things that you need to find. And all in all, like any pitfalls that could have come along and really spoiled the game, it's like they saw them all coming. They caught them in advance. It feels like a game that was lovingly put together, well play tested, and it feels like the developers have really put themselves into it to make it as good as it can be. I feel like it's a really well-made game. I noticed that it was nominated for a few awards. It was nominated for a Game Award and for a BAFTA, but it was muscled out by other titles. I think this game should be more well-known than it is. It's a wonderful game. That's Concrete Genie. The main one that I played over the holidays was Miles Morales, the Spider-Man sequel, because it's actually set at Christmas. So it just felt like a really good time to tuck into that game. I've had a lot of people recommend it to me, and because it's a PS5 game, it's nice to play something that is made for the PS5. So I played that one. It was a really enjoyable game, actually. It involves swinging around a beautiful rendition of New York City as Miles Morales, like a kind of new, younger Spider-Man apprentice. And it does what you would expect. It's a superhero story, but there is lots to like in this game. I loved the depiction of New York City at Christmas. It was just lovely. And moving around the city, traversal and fluid traversal and fun movement are things that I really enjoy. And Miles Morales had those. It was absolutely joyful, just swinging around the city. You could almost fly. You could just fly between these tower blocks. It was really fun to do. And everywhere you looked, you could see New York. You could see the ice rink in Central Park. You could see Fifth Avenue. You could see the Museum of Modern Art, the Empire State Building, and you're just swinging through Greenwich and Uptown and around Battery Park at the bottom of Manhattan. And it really took me back to my trip there. I spent a month in New York City a few years ago in the winter. And so I remember those sub-zero temperatures and the beautiful snowy cityscape. So I had a really nice time with Miles Morales. It was so much fun that I ended up clearing the entire map of Manhattan, of every little quest and side quest that you can do. And I really enjoyed it. It was the perfect game for the holidays. It really was. But with so many games lined up, and with such big games too, it was actually really nice to have a short game to cover that it's just a few hours long. It's on Game Pass. Anyone can try it if they're on Game Pass. And it was a really fun time. So without further ado, let's move on and talk about the featured game of the episode, the Artful Escape. So The Artful Escape is the first game by an Australian game developer called Beethoven and Dinosaur. It came out last week, that is mid-September 2021, if you're listening in the future. It's published by Annapurna Interactive, which is how I first heard about the game. I am a big Annapurna fan, even though they've been on a little bit of a losing streak lately with Last Stop and 12 Minutes and some games that I haven't really clicked with. But when I saw The Artful Escape, whenever I see a new Annapurna title, I'm always curious to try it. So The Artful Escape was on my radar for that reason. The initial release is on Xbox, Game Pass and Windows, although I'd be very surprised if it doesn't make its way to other platforms in due course. The game has a really interesting backstory. The director of the game is a guy called Johnny Galvatron, who is named after his old band, the Galvatrons, who used to tour around Australia and had like a decent career there for quite a while. And the game is his next step in his post-music industry creative life. And Johnny Galvatron, I've listened to a couple of interviews with him, one of which I'll put a link to in the show notes. He's a very entertaining character. And the game has such an interesting story. It's based on his imaginings from schoolbook doodles all the way through to his modern day creations, via his music taste, via 60s and 70s psychedelia and that kind of psychedelic aesthetic, Bowie and Ziggy Stardust and the Bowie universe of creating characters for yourself, and a certain kind of flamboyance. It has a very colourful, crisp Wes Anderson feel to it as well. Sometimes it can feel like you're looking at like a really nice design piece as much as a game. I feel like I saw some Volta-era Björk stuff in there too, very colourful, kind of alien, playful fashion going on, especially in some of these sci-fi fashions that the game has. But it also has a very interesting story of how the game came to be generally. It was kind of a wheeler-dealing story where Johnny had started this game. He had a little bit of concept art, some sort of proof of concept stuff, but nothing even approaching a demo. Tried to launch a Kickstarter, posted some screenshots on Reddit. The Kickstarter failed, but it was seen on Reddit by one of the guys from I Am 8-Bit, that physical manufacturer of console games, who contacted Annapurna Interactive on behalf of this game and put it on their radar, and they became interested in it. They talked to Johnny Galvatron. They asked him, "Are you going to be at PAX, and do you have a demo?" And the answer to both of those questions was no. But Johnny, being the character that he is, he saw this opportunity in front of him. He managed to get one of the last tables at PAX, apparently by hustling for it, magicked up a prototype, made some music. There was a 3-month window between Annapurna saying, "Do you have a demo and will you be at PAX?" And he didn't really have much in his hands, but he got that table, he made a demo, he turned up at PAX with some music equipment to strew across the table, borrowed a TV set, and Annapurna came to see the game right at the start of PAX and signed it up the next day. They lent a lot of support and clout to the game, and it ended up with a kind of a Hollywood voice acting cast, including Jason Schwartzman, Lena Headey, and Carl Weathers. So it's a really nice story around this game. It's a really a passion project, and I think that you can feel that. You can tell that it has a very strong aesthetic guideline, like it has a very strong vision that has been brought to fruition in this game. And so how does the dev describe this game? I found this developer description really interesting because it doesn't really talk about the game. It's described as if it's a film. It's just a plot description. And that's the same across Steam and Twitter and even the game's website. So it's more like something that you'd read on the back of a DVD case than it is a usual game description. Game descriptions normally include the genre and the central mechanics of the game to speak to gamers. But Beethoven and Dinosaur have described the game as this. On the eve of his first performance, Francis Vendetti battles with the legacy of a dead folk legend and the cosmic wanderings of his own imagination. Francis, a teenage guitar prodigy, sets out on a psychedelic, multi-dimensional journey to inspire his stage persona. So there's literally nothing. You wouldn't even know that was a game if you read that. It could be a book, but it's most likely to be a movie, right? So my description of it is, The Artful Escape is a side-scrolling, psychedelic prog rock odyssey in which rudimentary gameplay is offset by eye-popping visuals, a wholesome story of self-discovery, and buckets of humour and charisma. So there we go. I mean, maybe the reason that the description doesn't focus on gameplay is that it is a game that is a little light on gameplay. It's very much an audio-visual production, but that's not a negative to me. That's just what was decided. It was the vision for this game. So Metacritic currently has this at 8 out of 10 across platforms. So it seems that critics have been receptive to this one. The user scores are about the same. How Long to Beat has the game at 3 to 4 hours to complete. So this is a short game with an audiovisual focus that's been very well received by critics and users alike. So what is The Artful Escape? You play as Francis Vendetti. He is a struggling musician. He's young. He's a teenager. He hasn't really found his stride in life. He lives in a small mountain town called Calypso, Colorado, and he lives in the shadow of his late uncle, who was a renowned folk singer, very clearly modelled on Bob Dylan, called Johnson Vendetti. So Francis had a very famous uncle who has passed away, and he's living in his shadow as a musician, as a young musician. And we first meet Francis as he's preparing to play an anniversary tribute concert to Johnson. He's sitting on a bench at the top of a mountain in the wooded mountains around Calypso, just trying to get his shit together. But he's struggling to connect with the material. He's struggling to connect with his own creative impulses, with his identity, and with the level of expectation that has been placed on him. He's a confused young guy. It's very much like a kind of a teen movie setup, you know. And he's kind of afraid to say any of this out loud. It's all part of his internal struggle, his internal life. He isn't really into folk. He's got different visions in his mind. He hears different sounds in his mind. And he doesn't really want to be this character. He doesn't really want to be this folk singer persona that he feels has been pinned onto him at the expense of him developing his own character. He's actually into glam rock. He's into prog rock. He loves to shred and play this kind of ridiculous kind of Steve Vai, very clean, bright soloing. That's his vibe. And the only thing that he can think of to try and shake off this spectre of the past is to try and invent a new person altogether, to stop being Francis Vendetti and to transform into a character that can fulfill his musical vision. And so the night before the concert, after we've gone through a nice introduction where you're just running around the wooded town of Calypso, talking to people, getting a bit of background, it's all very crisp and clean and Wes Anderson style. It's very beautiful to look at. A little bit of very light platforming, but really you're just walking around talking to people, getting a lot of context. But the night before the concert, Francis is visited by an alien who invites him to come to an intergalactic rock tour and open for a star called Lightman, who is voiced by Carl Weathers. And so it is, very much in a kind of a Bill and Ted kind of vibe, that the sci-fi, the wider world, the future, and this kind of sci-fi wonderland kind of presents itself to Francis Vendetti, who jumps at the opportunity, goes out into space, and before you know it, is realizing his dreams in the cosmic extraordinary. I had intended to just play 20 seconds of music as usual and then come back to the podcast chat and the review of the game, but this game is so focused on music, and music is so central to what this game is, and it is such a kind of a bold, bright, big, brash, kind of a stadium rock sound that really defines the whole personality and experience of the game, that I thought I would just let that piece play. Like, that's basically the sound of the game. You're listening to that kind of music for the most of the time, for pretty much all of the game, you're listening to that kind of thing. It has a huge soundtrack that is playing behind the game. And there's a button that you can press to make Francis solo. So there is a backdrop of music, of drums and bass, and this kind of orchestral sounds and synths. And then there's a button that you can hold down, and Francis will solo on the screen as he's running across the screen, in harmony with the backdrop music. So you're kind of running through this cosmic extraordinary, as it's called, just soloing by holding down a button. And as you solo, the world responds to it. Like lights come on, creatures come out to listen, and the world, plants move, and the whole world seems to respond to Francis's guitar playing. It's really, really fun. It's really, really delightful, actually. But as for the gameplay of the Artful Escape, what this all amounts to really is that it's a left-to-right side scroller with very light platforming elements, occasional very, very light and short rhythm game sections where someone will, play music with circle, triangle, and square, and then you have to press circle, triangle, and square in response. It's this kind of Simon Says repetition of a rhythm game. It's not very great, to be honest. I'm always happy when those parts are over. But the fun thing about it is that as you're running from left to right, you have occasional chats with the characters in the game, with Lightman, with the different aliens and the different characters that you're going to meet out in the cosmic extraordinary, on the spacecraft where Lightman takes you, and then out on tour throughout the universe, doing things like going to meet an alien talent agent and to play gigs in a strange kind of Star Wars Tatooine-like bars in the far reaches of the universe. What this really amounts to is you're just running through this world of deserts and psychedelic forests and crystalline planets and abandoned cities and strange, wonderful, colourful environments that are just eye-poppingly bright and completely hypnotic and arresting to look at. You're soloing, and then sometimes Francis will slide down a slope like the front of a spaceship that seems to go on forever, or, falling trees, or a glacier ice flow in bright diamond colours and prismic colours. So you're kind of skating almost, and then occasionally you just have to hit jump to cross over a little chasm and to keep it going. Just skating through the game, listening to that huge soundtrack, looking at these beautiful colours, soloing your ass off. And I spent half the game just with a grin fixed on my face, because it's such a pleasurable game to play, even with those simple mechanics, that I played it in one sitting. It took me 3 hours and a half or so, and I played the whole thing in one sitting, and that's very rare for me. I'll usually get a little taste of it, go and do something else, come back, play an hour. But I just went through this whole game in one sitting. It was just such a pleasure, a real pleasure to play this one, even with the light gameplay that it has. So let's run through a few positives and negatives from this game. Let's start with the negatives for a change and finish on the positives. So there were a couple of little bugbears that I had with it. The gameplay is very, very basic. I think if you are the kind of player who is up for an experiential game where you're just enjoying rather than being challenged, then you'll love this one. But there are a lot of gamers who really thrive on challenge and on interesting mechanics, and that's what they love in games. And that just isn't present in this game. This game does not have interesting or even fully developed gameplay mechanics. It's really like a 4-hour psychedelic audio-visual experience with light gameplay in a game format. And so it's not a game for people that want hectic combat and to work up their skills. It's a game just to be enjoyed. So yeah, as for a certain kind of player, they're just not going to get off on this one, but other players are going to absolutely love it. I personally think that the platforming is so basic as to be almost inconsequential. You know, it's fun. You're just soloing and jumping. It's like invigorating for what it is, you know. It matches with the theme and the vibe of the gameplay. So to me, even if the platforming is basic, it's fine that way. It doesn't have to be anything more. There is a double jump, and then you can do a kind of a guitar pose in the air that gives you a triple jump, and that's basically it. You have to jump over obstacles, jump over gaps. I think I died 3 or 4 times in the whole game. There is no fail state. It's just an instant restart. And it's never difficult. It's always easy. And so it's very forgiving. And I like a game that is forgiving. And I like a game that just allows the player to enjoy it without gating progress. And this game does not gate progress whatsoever. Another downside is, again, it's a bit of a taste issue more than like a hard critique at the game. And that is that there is a slightly kind of adolescent vibe to this whole game. It's very Wayne's World. It's very Bill and Ted. It's very, 16, 17-year-old guy with pinned up posters of David Bowie on the wall, and an obsession with Fender guitars. It's got an adolescent feel to the whole thing. And that can work in its favor. I mean, it's one of the things that we like about movies like E.T. or Back to the Future or Bill and Ted, all of those kind of, or Wayne's World, I guess. It's these movies that are about that in-between stage of life. And they do have that kind of, that childish vibe to them. But that also comes with a little bit of innocence to it. And this game does have a little bit of that. It has a little bit of that John Hughes kind of joy at being young, innocence to the atmosphere of it as well. But that does come along with a lot of guitar noodling, a lot of kind of crazy soloing forever, and like sunglasses being cool, and kind of lots of times when your protagonist just kind of says, whoa, in that Keanu Reeves kind of way. And if you happen to be allergic to that kind of young dude, adolescent rock fantasy stuff, then this game is maybe going to fall flat for you. There's not a lot of depth here. It's just a kind of a silly sci-fi epic with a slight coming-of-age story to it as well. And it literally says on my notes here, that's it. Everything else is awesome. So that's the kind of mood that I was in when I finished this game. The rhythm game isn't so great, and it has that kind of teen vibe that you have to be on board with. But other than that, I mean, that stuff doesn't even matter. This is just an awesome game. So in terms of what's good about it, I've put this game is fun. It's just made to be fun. It's made to be delightful. It's made to be enjoyable. And it is a roller coaster from start to finish that is only really concerned with delighting the player, with color, with sound, and with joy. It's a very, very joyful game. And that's something that I think is missing in a lot of games. If you look at the kind of the zeitgeist of the kind of games that are being made, there is a lot of very dark stuff out there. There is a lot of post-apocalypse. There is a lot of Last of Us, death, and violent games, zombie apocalypses, all of that kind of stuff. And so it's really nice. This game is more in the side of things where games like Watam is, or where Katamari is. It's just silly and joyful and made for your amusement. And so I really appreciate that about this game. I really appreciate where it sits in the gaming zeitgeist. I would say it's a little bit like Psychonauts 2 as well. That's another game that is made to delight you. It's another game that has this kind of psychedelic source material. So it's nice to see these two together. I mean, Psychonauts 2 even has a sort of a psychedelic music level in it. So it's interesting to play these two back to back, considering that I haven't really played any other games that lean on the 60s and 70s psychedelia, and suddenly there's two here at once. So also on the list of praise for the game, the visuals. You can't get away from them. It's just spectacular, the whole thing. From the first mountaintop scene to the moment when you realize that you can light up the town that you're in by soloing and playing chords on your guitar, to going into space, going across planets where there are sunsets across this kind of rippling sand that's like Journey, the glittering of the sand, across strange oceans with just vibrant, eye-popping, prismic colour palettes and creatures of all shapes just coming out of the woodwork at every turn. It's just a real pleasure to behold. It's just like 3 or 4 hours of just pure sketchbook imagination, unrestrained imagination, I would say, with that psychedelic feel to it. And the music very much goes hand in hand with that. The soundtrack is just a huge home run. The whole thing is just a massive prog rock odyssey. That's not necessarily my music taste, that kind of grandstanding guitar stuff. But in the context of this game, I was up for it. I did enjoy the music. It's not something that I would ever listen to outside of this game. It's quite bombastic. It's quite kind of masculine, I guess. It's got that kind of Steve Vai thing going on. It's a little bit heroic in a way that I find to be a bit of a turn-off generally, in terms of the kind of the culture that I grew up with and where that masculine hero artist thing kind of sits. It's kind of outdated at this point, so you have to be willing to swallow a bit of that. I did also really like the story. It is kind of retro, classic sci-fi yarn where, you know, like the Skywalker thing, where a young guy in a small town turns out to be a big player on the grand stage of the universe. So it's a familiar sci-fi yarn that we've all heard and seen before, but it feels very comfortable as such. And as I was saying, when it comes to the kind of the enjoyment and the intention of this game, I think for it to be like a comfort viewing, kind of halcyon feeling, wholesome and enjoyable and just incredibly colourful, well voice acted. The actors clearly have a whale of a time doing the voice acting in this game. It all just comes together very nicely. The visuals, the music, the story, the voice acting, the whole overarching aesthetic, and that light gameplay that doesn't challenge you too much. It all comes together. It really works. So I had a great time with this one. I didn't really have a bad word to say about it. I would really recommend playing it and trying it, especially if you have Game Pass. I will replay this one, I think. It might end up being one of those games that I replay every year or so, like Journey or something. It's low commitment and high enjoyment. That's the Artful Escape. And so I spent the majority of the day with my PSVR headset on, playing a couple of games to talk about, games that I've been playing over the last week or so, but I thought I'd play in a little more detail, as I'd had like a couple hour sessions on each one of them. I streamed a little bit of it on Twitch. You can follow me there at Gaming in the Wild if you're interested in joining in the chat and seeing what I'm playing. VR is a great place to go and hide from the weather. And so that's what I did. Let's dive right in with the first game of the episode, which is a title that was recommended to me by Colton Goodman. You can follow him at Colton Goodman on Twitter. He's an enthusiastic gamer who I've been talking to a lot, and he recommended this one for me. It's called Bound. This game was a really wonderful surprise. There aren't many PSVR games available on PS Now, the subscription service, the Netflix for games that PlayStation runs, but this one is, and so I downloaded it and gave it a little spin. Colton had said that it was a visually interesting game, and I was really taken by surprise by it. It's quite beautiful. you play a ballet dancing princess, but that's not what it might sound like. We're not talking Princess Peach here. The princess that you play is a masked figure with a winged mask on, a shimmering dress, long slender limbs, very graceful. If you leave your princess alone for a moment, she'll stretch and do the splits, or like bend down and press her forehead to her knees as if she's warming up. And what she's warming up for is quite amazing. It's to dance through a series of arresting, shifting, virtual spaces that make up a kingdom in deep distress. It's one of those games that has two storylines. One of them is set in reality, and the other is set in an imagined world. So we get cutscenes of a heavily pregnant woman getting out of a car and walking to the beach. We control her. She's slow. She's carrying a book. We walk around. We can look down and see her feet sinking into the sand and look out to the sea. And she flicks through a book. It's a sketchbook. And we come to realise that this sketchbook is of drawings that she made as a child. And she used to escape her life into this imagined world. And we come to understand that she was escaping from a troubled family situation. This is told in kind of rendered VR scenes, static scenes that we look around. We see arguing parents, we see misbehaving younger brother, we see troubled situations. And when she escapes from this world, she vanishes into her imagined place, and that's where we are. So the princess is an avatar for our grown-up character as a child. None of this is really key to the game. It adds a little of emotional resonance, but what the star of the show is here is the movement. So you control the balletic slender princess with ribbons streaming from her wrists, and you dance and you run on tiptoes through a fantastic 3D world where staircases rise up before your feet, where you will surf along ribbons that spin dizzyingly. There's a ground far below of grey blocks that you have to avoid falling down to. And if you look up, there is a giant tower around which huge monsters climb. And as you progress through the levels, you dance when negative influences come for you, whether it's a stream of black triangles or a stream of white pearly strings that try to trap you. And when you dance, you escape them. And there's a feeling of immense freedom in controlling the character. She's wonderful to control, silky. You really do feel like you can leap, spin, and dance like a ballet dancer as you're avoiding these negative influences, which I guess are supposed to represent negative feelings. It's probably negative situations, trauma, terror, depression, nervousness, whatever you want to pin them onto. That's what they can be. And the game is a wonderful VR experience. You can choose whether you want to have it on static controls, where you can kind of flip left and right with a kind of angular way to avoid motion sickness, I guess. But I went for the full fat controls, where you the camera is behind you, and as you move, the camera spins. It is a little dizzying. At times you enter tunnels where the floor kind of tilts around you in strange ways and up becomes down. But I have to say this game was a beautiful surprise. It's like a fairy tale told for the Tron age. It's inexpensive. I think it's like £12 or £15 or something to buy, but if you're on PS Now, you can get it for free. as part of your subscription. It was made by Plastic Studios. You can follow them at Plastic Demo on Twitter. The music was by Oleg Shpudenko. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. So thanks to Colton for the recommendation. That was a really great VR game. That was Bound. The second game I'm going to talk about, it's another VR game for PSVR. You can play it outside of VR. I should have said that about Bound 2. You can play both of them outside VR if you want to, so you can experience those games on your TV. This one was another recommendation. This one came from Jero at Umbra Games on Twitter and YouTube. And this one is something quite different. It's a shoot 'em up, but that doesn't even begin to describe it. And it's called Rez Infinite. It's a music-driven game, and as you can hear from that kind of emphatic punctuation of drums and synth stabs in the music, it's a game where you are a figure made of light flying through a kind of a universe that I've described as being made of digital glitter. It looks a little like the Lawnmower Man. Has a Tron kind of feeling to it as well. And you fly along. You look left and your character will go left. You look right and they will go right. You can control speed with a kind of a dash button, and you're moving through a very abstract space. Enemies appear. They are like jellyfish or like flying animals, and you can lock onto them. So you hold down the fire button and you can move with the left stick to lock on to up to 8 at a time. And when you let go of that button, lasers will shoot out and take them all out. And each time one is taken out, it will be greeted with a sound. So whilst it's not a rhythm game in that you're pushing buttons along to the rhythm, it's a rhythm game in that everything that you do impacts on the music. And the soundtrack is quite stunning. It has like a kind of a EDM sort of club feel to it. It's a great sonic environment. And when you have the headset on, in particular, the music and the visuals make an absolutely hypnotic, invigorating, effervescent, adrenalizing kind of experience. You're flying fast, you're locking on, you're involved with the music. There are enemies all around you. You have to be looking left, looking right. It's quite an experience. I was really taken aback by this game. I wasn't expecting it to be as good as it is. It's the kind of thing that is kind of unforgettable. It's very short. I think I played through in half an hour to an hour. There are 4 or 5 different levels, and there's an Area X that you can play at the end. This game was something that I will replay again and again just for the experience, because I came out of it buzzing each time. It's a super cool game. It's made by United Game Artists. It was made by a Japanese team. The soundtrack is by Kechi Sugiyama. It's available on the PlayStation or in PSVR. Super recommended. Thanks to Jero for the recommendation for this one. That's Rez Infinite. This particular episode is dedicated to a game that could have been made for this show. It's a really artistic game. It is The Last Guardian. It's hard to say where this game sits in terms of whether it's indie or first party. It was produced with a lot of help from Sony, but by a very small team led by Fumito Ueda. the guy who directed Ico and Shadow of the Colossus. He made those games as part of Team Ico. Later that team it splintered somewhat, but some of them stayed together. It became Gen Design. Gen Design, from what I have been able to pick up, was operating inside Sony for a while. But then due to the kind of development hell issues that surrounded this game during its 9-year development period, Ueda ended up leaving Sony, acting as a creative consultant, and then somehow they all patched it together and helped it across the finish line. And that troubled process probably goes a little way to explaining why this game, despite being kind of, well, you could describe it as a cult classic. Shadow of the Colossus is perhaps more of a flat-out hit, more well-known, more well-regarded, and is in some ways a more well-rounded and realized game, at least in its remastered PS4 form. The Last Guardian was begun on PS2 and then moved to PS3. Ueda was apparently happy with the PS3 version, but a whole other team, Santa Monica Studios, I believe, were brought in to try and optimize the game's performance. And ultimately it was moved to PS4. So this game went through a lot of trouble on its way to reaching us. But I'm very happy that it did. It's the story of an unnamed boy and a creature called Trico. And Trico is a giant sort of crossover beast that is part cat, but has kind of bird-like claws and wings. But it has a head that looks more like the head of a raccoon or a dog, and it's feathered. So it's like a mythical beast that you could compare to a chimera or a griffin, but bigger. It's a made-up mythical beast. The game actually starts with the kind of diagrams of mythical beasts like unicorn, Pegasus, dragon, and Trico. And we begin the game at the bottom of an area that we come to know as the Valley. It's a huge kind of ruined, abandoned, crumbling city that exists in a kind of it's not really a valley. It looks more like a kind of a hollowed out tree trunk, but it's huge, vertical, extremely vertical. And you start at the very bottom in a cave. Trico at this point is chained up, unfriendly, deeply unfriendly, and the boy is terrified of the creature. And in the first few moments, we realize that we can't get out of this space that we're in, and so the puzzling aspect of the game begins. Trico has abilities that the boy does not. The boy has abilities that Trico does not. So you feed Trico a little, and you pet Trico a little, and he's still very suspicious of you. But using the boy's ability to slip through small spaces, trigger switches to open doors, and to kind of spot solutions to moving through and escaping from this environment. And then Trico is able to leap great distances and kind of brute force situations and leap up with his front paws onto tall ledges. And you can then climb onto Trico, grip his feathers, climb up Trico onto his head, and then get to places that you couldn't get otherwise. And so the relationship between the boy and Trico begins, and that is the central premise of the game. It's a journey through a kind of a beautiful environment made by two beings that come to trust each other over time. And so that central bond is beautiful, noteworthy, and the core of this game. It's not... I'm going to try and do this spoiler-free, because you could talk about this game for a long time without even mentioning plot. There is a good plot. It's largely wordless, but occasionally you'll get an older male narrator who'll fill you in with just a couple of lines here and there. And it's clearly the voice of the boy as an older man telling the story of this ascent through the valley with this creature. And that bond develops in a really interesting, dynamic way. At first, Trico is kind of very independent, clearly a little scared by this situation. He's chained when you originally find him, and you have to set him free to get through the first area. But then you have to start problem solving together. And at first you have no control over Trico, and you never have real control over Trico. Trico is a fantastic AI that behaves in a way that makes you believe fully that this is a wild creature with a mind of its own, with instincts of its own. And you have to kind of, over time, figure some stuff out about that. It's never fully spelled out in the control scheme, but as a player, if you mount Trico, climb onto his back, hold down R1, and push the stick in a direction, the boy will attempt to direct Trico to move in that direction. Sometimes Trico does, sometimes Trico has no interest. If you hold down R1 and hit triangle, Trico will be encouraged to look up, whether to set his paws on a high ledge or to jump. Again, it's a process. You have to sometimes encourage Trico for quite a while to do these things. If you hold down R1 and hit X, you can encourage Trico to look down or to stamp. And these controls aren't spelled out. I actually found out about some of this stuff when I got stuck, and I dipped into a guide to get through a particularly problematic passage of play, of which there are a few, and noticed in the notes that came with this particular guide that these commands were spelled out. There are other commands and actions that I also found out about in a similar way that are never spelled out in the game. For example, occasionally you will come across these kind of hollow suits of armor that attempt to catch the boy. Trico can destroy them very easily with a swipe of the paw. They sometimes come with spears and try and spike Trico. If they do, you can pull spears out of him. But I didn't find out until very late in the game that when Trico swipes down a suit of armor and it's lying prone on the ground, the boy can pull the head off the armor and destroy it. And I didn't know that. And there are times in this game where, for example, Trico is kind of swiping under a door and you're being beset on the other side by suits of armor. And you have to operate a switch to let Trico in and fuck them up. And Trico can swipe them down. He can reach under the door and swipe them. And if I had known that I could pull the heads off prone suits of armor, it would have really helped me through some quite hairy gameplay situations. So the game doesn't do a great job of signposting your abilities, your range of actions. There was another puzzle I remember where there are 3 holes, and you can tempt Trico to stick his head into each one of them. And one of them has some vines growing, but there are vines growing everywhere in this ruined city. It's nothing special. It looks like part of the scenery. But I got really stuck. I asked my friend Kieran, who's been playing the game alongside me, how to get through this. He played the game over a much longer period, took loads of breaks, came back to it fresh, which probably was a good way to play it. I played it across the course of a week. It's a game, if you take regular breaks, perhaps the frustration would be lessened. But he told me that you can leap onto Trico's back and you can jump onto the vines. But the game never tells you that. The game never gives you that first inkling that you can interact with the scenery in that way to solve that puzzle. You could call it lateral thinking, I guess, and problem solving, but I think that good game design, in my opinion, will introduce you to elements of that type. So if you come to a puzzle that needs you to pull the head off something, or a puzzle that needs you to climb vines, or a puzzle that needs you to encourage Trico to act in a certain way, the game should have in some way prepared you for that, like primed you on the controls that are available to you. Otherwise, you're left a little lost. I'm pretty sure that plenty of people played through this game without ever utilizing some of the controls, and found some puzzles and scenarios much more difficult than they needed to be as a result. You could look at this as a choice from the director. I've read a little bit about the director's intentions. And I mean, even on the wiki page for the game, there's a quote from him where he says the long development period meant that he had to keep it in mind that this game was for new players and not for people that had played it a million times in testing over a period of years. But even though he has awareness of that, Ueda, it seems that to me that some things went either ill-judged in deciding to omit introductions to game mechanics, or went under the by the wayside in the fact that they just didn't. So I would say be prepared if you're going to play this game that some puzzle solutions may be unapparent. The solutions are maybe a little bit out of your reach. I would say that this is a game that I would absolutely recommend using a guide for if you get stuck, just to keep the gameplay moving. Because the narrative and the thrust of the game are so enjoyable that being held up for hours, cooped up in a small room with a puzzle, is going to suck the enjoyment out of it for you. And there is a lot of enjoyment to be had. Trico is one of my favorite video game creations of all time, and that's saying a lot. In the past, I've said that I'm a huge fan of Aloy in Horizon Zero Dawn. I think that her movement and her personality, physicality, her interaction with the environment and the dialogue choices that you get create like a kind of believable, rounded, enjoyable character. And as I played that game, I almost felt like I was doing it in collaboration with Aloy. She'll say, hey, look, and kind of point things out in the environment. You feel like you're on a journey with her. When she looks down, you know that she's looking at something and it directs your attention. So it feels like a kind of really amazing connection between player and their avatar in the game. And Trico is incredibly believable. I found this really interesting. The name of the creature Trico in Japanese kanji is pronounced Toriko, which can be taken to mean prisoner or baby bird. Baby bird would be Torinoko, or a portmanteau of bird and cat, which would be Tori Nico. So it's like an interesting wordplay, even the name of the beast. The Western pronunciation has been Trico, but during the game, the boy, when he calls to Trico, says Toriko, in a really cute way. And you can call for Trico, and he'll generally head in your direction. If you fail to get him through a corridor, you can just walk yourself and call him. But Trico kind of, when you come into a new space, like if it's open, there are relatively few open spaces in the game, but when you first enter one, Trico will run like a dog that's been let out of the house. If you're in a really narrow, tight space, Trico will get nervous and like his ears will twitch. And he has to crouch and squeeze through spaces in a similar way that you might, a really similar way to a cat. Trico also stretches after strenuous passages of play like a cat, this kind of cat yoga, paws down and kind of real stretch of the back. Trico, like in some points, there's a puddle of water and he'll roll in it joyfully. Other times he's scared of water. There are times when he has to sort of scramble up really unstable structures. During combat, Trico kind of jumps and sort of puts his head back and is really kind of bird-like and kind of pecks down at them, swipes warriors away. And then after combat, because Trico doesn't like to fight but is often called to in the game, Trico will freak out after a fight and just jump up and down and kind of be really apparently in a state of kind of anxiety and discomfort and after a combat, and so you have to climb onto Trico and scratch his head to calm him down. Also, if you get really stuck in a puzzle, Trico will wander around for a while and then often express his own curiosity by finding the way forward himself, even if as the boy you haven't been able to do so. And so the bond between Boy and Trico and this incredibly believable Trico creature grows throughout the game. The commands, Trico starts to trust you and listen to you more as the game progresses. And so you start to feel more like you're working together. And it's a beautiful central gameplay relationship. It's compelling and it really fills you with warmth when it's at its best. And those are some of my favourite passages of play. It's when Trico and the boy are working together and using their strengths, their individual strengths to progress through the game. Trico is at times alarmed by these stained glass eyes that hang like Trico repellents. He'll just stop and stare at them and kind of you have to sort of scramble forward, find your way to wherever it's hanging or wherever it is and kind of trash it, roll it, drop it, smash it, so that Trico can move forward. At times when you manage to actually get upwards through this vertical valley, in inverted commas, there are times when there is no way forward, seemingly, but if you hop onto Trico's back, he'll identify like a outcrop of rock and outcropping, and he'll pounce up there with you on his back, and then pounce again. And some of these moments when you're seemingly stuck, but then Trico finds the way forward and bounds, like it feels huge when he moves. Like he'll crouch down and like wiggle his little wings and kind of bob his head and then leap. And when he does so, it feels vast. It feels like you feel the weight of the creature, and he'll crash onto the top of like a pillar. And sometimes these stone pillars, like they're just broken pillars that litter the city, the ruined city. And Trico will stand on there like a cat on a fence post, look around and then find the next one. Sometimes when Trico kind of bounds 6-7 times in a row, and you're making this really fast progress, it feels amazing. So that's when the game is at its best. When the game is at its worst, there's a reason I think that The Last Guardian is not considered in the same bracket as Shadow of the Colossus, which is considered by many to be just a straight-up contemporary classic. Last Guardian is more of a cult game. Didn't quite get the same rapturous critical acclaim. It got a mixed critical response, although I think it's around the 8 mark on Metacritic, but few reviews of The Last Guardian came without qualified praise. Common complaints that I fully agree with are that the camera is terrible. So when you're moving through claustrophobic spaces with a huge beast with you in third person, if you turn and Trico's kind of close to you, the camera will go behind or through Trico and you'll just get a screen full of feathers. Can't see shit. In some tight spaces, the camera doesn't seem to know what to do with walls, and so it'll kind of bounce and hover and you can't really see where you're going or what you're doing. Some points where it's like they've almost got it right. Say there's a low doorway, and if you try and move through it as Trico's trying to move through it, the camera knows that it should be on one side or the other. But if you're trying to squeeze through and Trico's in the way, the camera cannot be on one side or the other, can't move through, and so just becomes trapped and starts freaking out. And so throughout the game, your immersion is broken by noticing the camera, and rather than controlling the boy, you're trying to maneuver him to get the camera to look where you need it to look, so you can see what you're doing, which is really far from ideal. Another common criticism of the game is Trico is not always cooperative. So you can come into a space, you can see the solution to a puzzle, and then it can take you a really long time to just get it done, to execute that solution. And you have to encourage Trico to perhaps jump up to a high space or squeeze through something. And he won't do it. And sometimes it seems good and realistic, like Trico's kind of a wild creature. He's not just going to obey your commands, he's doing his own thing, and so you have to kind of lead him there. Perhaps you have to tempt him with food. Perhaps you have to get on his back and point in that direction multiple times to try and get him interested in what you're trying to accomplish. But sometimes it seems like Trico gets a little stuck, and you end up having to do the same command kind of 10 times, and in the end you'll get through, but it's just because Trico had to position himself in order for the animation to take place, for you to progress. I'm showing a little bit of video now for those who are watching on YouTube of this happening, of me trying to encourage Trico to jump through a hole, and Trico just not doing it for 5 minutes of trying to persuade the creature to do something. And whether or not you buy into that as a gameplay idea, to some degree I think will define whether or not you buy into the game. You have to enjoy trying to get Trico to do stuff if you're going to enjoy the game, and you have to be willing to deal with the fact that the boy is he's quite heavily animated in a similar way to Prince of Persia and Another World. Those are two games that I thought of a lot in the way that his flat colours are. His outfit looks a little bit like the original Prince of Persia. And in those games, if you remember, if you've played them, you can hit left, but then if you're running right, you hit left, and then the character has to slow down, skid, turn, and that might be like a kind of a 1 or 2 second animation before you can put in another input. And the boy is a little like that. He's a heavily animated character that's not always super responsive. And interestingly, on the wiki page, it also said that Another World and Prince of Persia were formative influences for Fumito Ueda. So this is perhaps something that he's comfortable with. And maybe that's just a design choice, but I think for some players it will be frustrating. So yeah, there are downsides to this game, as well as the many upsides. It's a mixed bag. You have to overcome some fairly frustrating situations to get to the end. It's about a 12 to 15 hour game, and I say that it's absolutely worth playing, despite the criticism that I've laid out in this show. I would say play it with a guide alongside you, and don't be afraid to use it, or with a friend on call on Facebook chat to help you through the harder parts. It's a great game. The relationship that you have with Trico, and just the monumental achievement of creating this creature that will explore and express its own personality, behave in a completely naturalistic way, and not seem like a video game creation, but rather a believable creature, is something that I haven't really experienced in any other game. And for that alone, I recommend this game. Interestingly, Fumito Ueda is working on a new project, which has found full funding from Epic Games as of March 2020. It's been 4 years since The Last Guardian, and I'm sure he's been working away. So from the director of Ico, Shadow of the Colossus, both of which are on PS Now, by the way, so you can play them for free if you're on PS Now, and The Last Guardian. which seems like the kind of perfect PS Plus or PS Now game, especially considering Ueda's relationship with Sony. But I think it's not on there now, so you have to buy it. I actually bought a physical copy of it for £15 or something. There is another game in this series coming. He is an auteur. These games are all really original, really creative, fascinating, and all flawed. But with the correct resources and the correct team and the experience gained from these games, I'm really excited for whatever Fumito Ueda comes up with next. It's also worth mentioning that the music of this game was written by Takeshi Furukawa and played by the London Symphony Orchestra. It's an incredibly lush soundtrack that swells beautifully at moments of excitement in combat or moments of emerging into new environments. It's an audiovisual spectacle. It's an original gameplay concept, and it's a game that cultivates, that provoked in me a lot of wonder, moments of real wonder, and that's something that I think elevates a game. So despite even the flaws of the game, the moments of wonder elevate it to heights that some games, even more well-rounded and fully formed games, never reach. So I recommend this with qualified praise, but you can probably tell that I love it. That's The Last Guardian.